I'm Steve Reeder, and this is Monrovia Moments, and this is being filmed by AP History student Taylor Turner, and we are here today with Don Ambrose. So the first question is, what year did you graduate?
1959.
And did you attend Monrovia Elementary or Hall?
Monrovia.
And so when you were in elementary, were there any teachers that really stood out?
Miss Ruth Curtis. She was my second and third grade teacher.
Okay.
Back then they taught two classes, like you'd be in the second and third with the same teacher in the third and fourth and fifth, or the fifth and sixth.
Okay. What made her stand out?
Well, she was from a farm background and very likable and easygoing, and she was also my dad and mother's teacher when they was in school.
Okay.
And she was, later on, she was my son's teacher.
Okay, so she was here for a long period of time.
Long time.
Now, when you got into high school, you were heavily involved in extracurricular and sports, but were there any high school teachers that really stood out and made an impact?
Mr. Schuler, Paul Schuler, was a very good teacher, very, very strict, but he was a good teacher. Sometimes he was above the students, but he was a great student.
Okay, and then you played baseball at Monrovia.
Yes.
So where did the baseball team play when you were in school?
Okay, we used to play over in the old diamond by the old school down where Little League plays now.
Okay.
And then the last 2 years they built a diamond over here where the parking lot is.
Okay.
And we played there.
Now, did the baseball team have very much success when you were here?
Yeah, first year of my freshman year they played softball.
Okay.
But then my other 3 years we played hardball.
Okay.
And most of the boys that played baseball also played basketball. And there was a rule, if we played basketball, you had to run track.
Okay. And now, was baseball in the fall when you were a student here?
Yes.
Okay, so you had baseball in the fall, then basketball, and you did track in the spring.
Right.
Now, was the track also by the old school?
No, it was over here, but
Okay.
it was cinders.
Okay, all right. Now, basketball. So you played in the iconic old gym.
Right.
What was that like?
Well, it was different. The crowd was right up against you. Sometimes if you throwing the ball in, somebody might have you by the trunks or pinching you. And it was a small gym, had about 6 rows, maybe 7 bleachers, and then the stage, people sat on the stage. And it was, sometimes it was a little cool, but it was a good place to play. The floor had a lot of bounce to it.
Now, when you were in school, Mooresville was the big rival in basketball, correct?
Yes.
So those games probably gotten pretty intense. Was there any big games in Mooresville that you can remember?
Well, we was at Mooresville and we was leading about 90% of the game until the last 3 or 4 minutes, and we ended up losing. And that was my senior year, and I had 2 or 3 good friends played on Mooresville's team. And
now, the one thing that your team was really accomplished was the Tri-County Tournament Championship.
Yes.
So explain what the Tri-County Tournament was.
Well, the Tri-County was just about like going to the sectional. There was Emnitz, Gosport, Monrovia, Morgantown, Emnitz was all in it. Smithville and I don't believe Steinsville was. And when we won that, then we went on to Bloomfield.
Okay.
And when we got down there, we had 3 players. The front line was 5'11", and we had a 5'6" and a 5'8" guard. When we got down there, we played Bloomfield, and they had 2 guys that was 6'5". So we done pretty good against them, but they ended up winning the whole tourney. And I think at that time, probably in the tourney, there was probably 100 teams.
Wow.
Over the state. It was about as close to the sectional as could be.
That was the last time that Monrovia basketball had any real success until probably the the 1990s or so. So that was a really big deal.
Yes.
Now, you are also not only heavily involved in sports, but you're also really involved in a lot of the extracurricular activities at the time. So explain a little bit like your role at FFA and what all that entailed.
Okay, when we first come into high school, we signed up for FFA or agriculture, and then we got in. Mr. Wagner said, well, you're going to be in FFA also. So we had to keep records, and like I had some chickens at home and a garden and such, and I had to keep records of what was spent, what we got off of it. And then I had my 4-H hog project. And then when I got ready to get out of school, Mr. Wagner asked me if I would, since I was going to move on to a farm, my grandmother's farm, if I would keep records for 2 years and then go for the American Farmer. And I said, well, I will. And surprisingly, I kept it on a few calves I bought and what was going on the farm, and I ended up with the American Farmer Award.
Now, were you the first person around here to get that from the school?
As far as I know, Mr. Wagner said I was the first, and I don't think there's been one since.
Wow. So that's a huge accomplishment for the FFA.
And I was also the district FFA writer for a essay.
Okay.
I won the state essay contest. And Mr. Schuler and Mrs. Cook went over my essay with a fine-tooth comb before we went on to the district, because every word had to be right.
And so 4-H at the time, a lot of people have commented just about how big the 4-H festival was for Monrovia. So give me a little bit of background about how the 4-H fair started and how I broke away from the Mooresville one.
Okay, when I first started in 4-H, Monrovia would go to Mooresville and we'd have a local fair, and then from there you go to the county fair, and after that the state fair. Well, we stayed over at Mooresville, I think, until 1957, and they used to give us $1 for every project we showed, and then of course the ribbons. Well, Mooresville said, we have more business people giving to the 4-H show than Monrovia does, so we want to keep it just Mooresville. So we come over and they got some parents together and Mr. Wagner, and they set up a fairgrounds used back of the old school, and the ladies served meals to pay for it, and that we had a fair here ever since.
Yeah, and the one thing people talk about is just how well attended that was. It was more than one day.
Yes, it was really 2 days most of the time, but a lot of the parents, I mean about all the parents was there, and a lot of people from around town, and it was a big thing.
So they're kind of behind the school, but didn't they also use the school for some of the craft projects as well?
They used the school. They had a tent at the outside wall of the Mr. Wagner's room, and that's where they had their hot dogs and hamburgers and such that they sold, and the inside projects was in, I can't remember what room, I think it was Mr. Wagner's. But we had about 100 members in the Monrovia Ribbon Winners, and that was Mr. Wagner's. And after he retired, he asked me if I would take it. So I was the 4-H leader for probably 15 years. And as the years went along, we didn't have as much participation because they had a lot of other things to do.
Sure. Now, the one thing that you and I had already talked about, and this is something that the history is pretty thin on, and especially my knowledge, is the sugar camps that used to be around Monrovia at the time. What do you know about the sugar camps? Like, where were they? Who was involved?
Okay, there was a sugar camp down Baltimore Road. If you go on down Baltimore past Briarwood, up on the hill, Jeff Dillon lives. And that was my grandfather, and that's where I farmed. And he had a sugar mill there.
Okay.
And his name was Noah Schrader. And Willard Schrader over here, about 2 miles east, He had one, but there was no relation.
Okay. Now, were either of those Schraders connected to Virginia Jet?
Willard was.
Okay. So there were two sugar camps, both
Yes.
by Schraders, but they were not
Yes.
related.
Yes.
So how did the process work on that?
Well, Grandpa had as I was probably 2 or 3 years old when he was still doing it. He had the pegs in the trees and would catch the sugar drippings, and then he'd take it in and use wood and cook it down, and then he would sell the sugar.
And like at one point, it seems like it was kind of almost a community thing that a lot of people would come and help.
Yeah, and I never, he didn't tell me a lot about it, but I know that, yes, there was people helped, and it was a big job.
Now, besides the 4-H that you were participating in, you were also involved in the early fire department.
Yes.
So what's the story and the origin of this?
Well, the Monrovia had a group got together, and they decided they wanted to start a volunteer fire department. So Myron Caney worked for Midwest Chemical, which done the fire extinguishers. So he decided he would help them, and Jack Martin and Donis Miller and Clyde Marley and my dad, and then there was probably 8 or 9 other men, and some of, like me and Bobby Marley and some of the younger ones was also in it. And they, up by Donis Miller's, there was an empty building, and they built their own truck.
Okay.
And of course, Donis being a welder and the Martin being a mechanic and all that. So they built their own truck. Then later, we went together, all of us, and built the firehouse.
Which is down by Prey Street.
Right.
Across from, okay.
And that was all done by the volunteers.
Wow.
And when the alarm or radio or whatever would go off, or telephone, why, everybody was jumping off their tractor and whatever and getting in and taking off for the fire.
Wow. Now, besides being part of the fire department, you also had a real integral part of the first festival. The research that you had done and the video that you had done is really an important part of the history of Monrovia. So what was your involvement with that first festival in 1984?
Well, I was asked if I would take movies of different things, so I volunteered, and we went around, and I would get out on a Sunday morning, and people would come out of church, and I would photograph who was coming out. Jacqueline Dillon took me up in an airplane, and I shot some pictures out of the window of the airplane and of the town and different things. And then when the parade come, I was up on top of the bank building and filmed from up there. And then several people wanted copies and made several copies and for the people.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and I was given a copy, and we have it on the website, and it's amazing the reaction that people have, because a lot of those people that are in that have passed.
Yes.
And so to see those people and just how vibrant Monrovia was at the time, because there's a lot of great footage of not only the parade, but Bill Fisher emceed the pageant, and they had the 32 sectional team, some of the survivors of that, the 42 team. I mean, it was really remarkable what the festival committee did.
Yes.
And to continue that every year has just been a real accomplishment.
Yes.
So you also were involved in coaching, and was Preach Pryor one of the assistants?
Preach Pryor and myself, we coached the 7th grade for probably 15 to 20 years, and I run the clock. Preach and I run the chains for the football all that time. I was president of the Football Fathers, and we had to get down there and take care of the concession stand, and the women would take care of that. And
so the Football Fathers, so this is just another example of, I think, Monrovia and like the can-do attitude,
Right.
At first the basketball team played in the basement, and then they built the community center and the old gym, and then we need a fire department, so we get a volunteer fire department, and then we want a football team, and so the football fathers get together. And for that to have been, this is the 50th year, and you have all of these people pitching in to start that program. And football program, you have a grain bin for the concession stand,
right.
From the Hubbard Mill, and then you have the bleachers out of the old gym that were donated by the Jetson family. For me, it's just a remarkable thing. So, and then also, it wasn't like you just started; you were part of the chain gang forever on this. So, who else was involved? Preach Pryor, and who else? Gordon Hadley. Who else was involved in this?
Gordon Hadley done the tiling of the field. Bernard Shatters, which had a farm just west of Monrovia, was president of Power and Light, and he sent a crew out and they put up the lights.
Now, was that donated?
Yes.
So I've always heard that we had the best lit football field.
Yeah.
And I've seen some footage from the 70s, and it's like they're playing during the day.
Yeah.
I mean, it is just so well lit.
Yeah. And Hubbard would give fertilizer and stuff and grass seed.
So all this was just donated?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Now, you were, with Pryor, and you did the junior high basketball, but you also were involved with Jerry Hoover.
Yes.
So give a little bit of background on Jerry. So Jerry Hoover was at Ben Davis when Randy Whitman was there. He's this legendary coach.
Well,
so what was it like to work with him?
He also come from Indiana State when he come here, and he was a different bird. He was a disciplinarian, and if the boys wasn't around, he wasn't too good not to tell you a good joke. But he was all business. He run the program, and he had Preach and I. He didn't have any assistants at that time, and so Preach and I'd go with him and just sit on the bench and just a little backup.
Yeah. And like when Monrovia had not had very much success in basketball for a while.
No.
And then when he got there, they weren't having great seasons, but he was definitely turning the program around during this time period here.
Yes, he was. And I guess last year he was still coaching.
So yeah, he has been recently still involved in that. I'm not sure exactly how long ago, but he is still at it for a while. So now you were the American Farmer, and you've been, a member of the Monrovia Football Parents, or the Football Fathers, which became the Football Parents.
Yes.
Charter member of the Volunteer Fire Department. What are some other awards and honors?
In the Lions Club. I was in the county 4-H. I was in charge of the swine barn. Had to get the judge and get the kids out there to show when it was time and all that, and stay overnight to try to keep them in the building so they wasn't out doing things they wasn't supposed to. And just several things. I felt like I wanted to do things for the town, or this community or school, and that's the reason I done that. That was a good thing for me.
And you've also were the Grand Marshal of the festival.
Yes, I was.
So, and that
Jackie Ferguson and I, my wife had passed away the year before, and so they had Jackie and I. We'd both been in it for a long time in the festival.
So, is there any other things you'd like to add to our interview?
No, one thing I appreciate the job you're doing in this, bringing back things in the community, because there's a lot of people that don't know what's going on, and it's just a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate it. But we've had a lot of help, and a lot of people like yourself and other people in the community have really taken the time, and we have a lot of students that have really participated as well. So this will conclude our interview with Don Ambrose. So thank you, and this was a Monrovia Moments.